May my words be in the name of our one triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
Good morning. Good morning. It is such a pleasure to be with you this morning on this Criminal Justice Sunday. The idea to dedicate just one service a year to learn and pray about our criminal justice system is the fruit of the partnership between the two Episcopal dioceses in Oregon and Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. It is also known as Criminal Justice Sabbath in other faith groups. Congregations throughout the state have been observing Criminal Justice Sunday for some time, and we look forward to the practice continuing to grow. At our 125th Diocesan Convention, the convention urged the people of the Diocese of Oregon to seek greater understanding and compassionate engagement with those touched by crime. Victims, criminals, public service, their families, especially those who suffer individually and uniquely. Here at St. John the Baptist, you've helped lead the way, not only by living into your mission of being a place where tradition welcomes diversity, but as the Apostle James says, by being doers of the word, not merely hearers who deceive themselves. I have seen this doing and being in your long-standing ministry at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility, where so many are being afflicted with painful suffering. I especially want to thank my colleague, Vicki Charlton, not only for her leadership and support and perseverance with that ministry, but also as a colleague and a long-standing member of the Diocesan Prison Ministry Commission. And I want to thank you, the people of St. John's, for continuing the support of Criminal Justice Sunday. I can't emphasize enough the spiritual gifts from being as well as doing in prison ministry. We all understand doing pretty well, but not so much being, or the relationship between the two, the being and the doing. Most of you are familiar with the story in Luke of Jesus' visit to the house of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Martha was doing all the right things. She was doing the reasonable and hospitable things, rushing around, fixing, preparing. As the text says, except she was distracted with the serving. Jesus gently chides her, "Martha, Martha, you worry about many things." But one thing was missing. She was not present. Being means being present. And presence is experienced in a participative way, outside our ordinary doing mind, which always wants a job, judging, controlling, and analyzing. Presence, on the other hand, is a non-judgmental way of seeing, tasting, and loving. This is what the volunteers at Coffee Creek are doing. Presence is both the essence and the gift that prison ministry and jail ministry are all about. And that gift, like all true gifts, is the gift that keeps on giving. Yes, we do the 10,000 things, as the Buddhists say. They are necessary and good. You see, the wisdom that we need to come is from the necessary wisdom that comes from presence. You see, wisdom is what the victims and the inmates and their families and correctional staff give back to us, although they are mostly unaware of it. Inmates find small ways to thank us, sometimes making cards for us. And they help each other by sharing food, or giving envelopes, or free haircuts, because they feel the presence of compassion in their own hearts. This little bit of wise compassion is precisely the different way of knowing those 10,000 things. Present for the other is a lesson in this morning's gospel. It's yet another example where Jesus doesn't abandon the law, the code of the tradition, but explains where it went wrong. In response to the Pharisees calling him out because his disciples did not wash their hands, Jesus responds quoting Isaiah. His people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition. Isaiah here is pointing out how doing without being can have the unintended consequence of doing exactly what was not God's purpose. This lesson is really not about washing hands or the purity codes per se, but about how our tradition, including our laws, could get in the way or actually reverse our intention for a fair, just, and effective justice system, which is God's purpose. Earlier in Mark, Jesus tells us that loving your neighbor as yourself is the second greatest commandment. And here we see how the Jewish purity code, designed to preserve Jewish tradition in a time of foreign occupation, have the perhaps unintended result of separating the unclean from the clean, the poor neighbor from the rich neighbor. When we don't have love for our neighbor, we can't truly love or be present for ourselves. In our communities today, we don't have purity codes that separate the poor from the rich, but we do have city and county ordinances and income disparity that have the same and, again, perhaps unintended consequence. We live in communities divided by zip codes, which define where the well-off live and where the poor live, where the schools are good and where the schools are not so good. We live in communities where the zip code you were born in pretty well defines your future. This is the economic or distributive injustice, where how much money you have, not who you are, defines your status. As early as 1979, two researchers, Lloyd Olin and Alden Miller, in their seminal study of the causes of crime, concluded, in the final analysis, crime is a community problem. The means for its prevention and control must be built into the fabric of community life. This can happen only if the community accepts its share of responsibility for having perpetuated those pathways of socialization that lead to sporadic criminal episodes for some and careers and crimes for others. All the subsequent research has done nothing but affirm this conclusion. But communities have not accepted their responsibility. On the contrary, our communities continue to attempt to make crime the responsibility of state and federal governments. 17 years ago, the Oregon had a prison population of approximately 5,500. Today we have approximately 14,000 men and women housed in 14 prisons throughout the state. 5 of those prisons are located in eastern and central Oregon, and they hold 70% of the entire prison population. Far from the I-5 corridor, far from their families, out of community, out of mind. These are just some of the challenges all communities face in reversing this trend and for us in becoming beloved community. In his encyclical, The Joy of the Gospel, Pope Francis identifies gospel justice as the antidote to toxic politics. Our own Bishop Michael told me the same thing months ago when I asked him about the challenges of preaching in our own times of toxic politics. Biblical justice deals with at least 4 kinds of justice. Mostly distributive or economic justice, which I've already described, but also criminal justice, which is again divided into retributive justice and restorative justice. However, all of these are related. It's no coincidence that most of the folks in our prisons and jails are poor, poor whites, poor blacks, poor Hispanics. You already know about retributive justice, vengeance, punishment, the infliction of pain for the purpose of deterrence. This is the usually kind of retributive justice that's announced on the news when the prosecutor states justice has been done. It's the dominant philosophy of our current criminal justice system. A system that's not working for victims, it's not working for communities, it's not working for offenders. It has become a very expensive example of how our tradition of legalism has sucked dry the very community resources needed to prevent crime in the first place. Good schools, good mental health, good jobs. Oregon spends more of its general fund dollars on corrections than any other state in the country, leaving our communities even more at risk. Restorative justice is about healing. Instead of asking who is to blame, and ask who is hurt. Instead of asking how to punish, it asks how do we heal. Restorative justice is biblically based, recognizing that when a crime is committed, a hurt, a wound, is inflicted on the soul of the victim, on the soul of the community, and on the soul of the offender. It asks what can be done to provide the best outcomes for each of these victims. Restorative justice is the theology and practice of our works of mercy in prison ministry. When we visit the prisoners, when we restore the victim, when we provide for the families, when we welcome the offender back into our community. Restorative justice is what we're doing in partnership with the Diocese of Eastern Oregon, where in the upcoming convention, just in October, they will approve the first Episcopal Parish inside an Oregon prison. It's the first time I know of that we've had any kind of presence in an Oregon prison. Restorative justice is what we're planning to do to help poor families in the I-5 corridor visit their loved ones in prison in the Diocese of Eastern Oregon. Our boat is so small and our sea is so big. The Episcopal Church cannot go it alone. Restorative justice is what we discussed earlier this year in Portland when the two Episcopal dioceses, in partnership with Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, convened the first ever statewide prison ministry conference called Hearing the Cries. It drew 185 people from different faith from all over the state, filling the cathedral to capacity. Regrettably, we had to turn away about 25 others who had not registered. Together, we will follow up during the coming 2 years to refine and implement restorative justice in prisons and jails throughout the state of Oregon. But we need more people on our boat, more deckhands. We need more boats. We need to create fleets of boats on this sea of pain. These are just among the opportunities to create beloved community. If you're hungry for a little wisdom, there are 10,000 things you can do in prison ministry, but only one thing is necessary. Consider joining us in prison ministry. You can ask me, or you can ask Nikki, or you can follow up with the directions in the bulletin. Amen.